at a price of $13 million a Bitcoin in USD terms, or $280 trillion in the network. Does the world turn upside down? No. What happens? Well, everything pretty much stays the same, except for those that embrace Bitcoin get rich and powerful. Those that don't embrace Bitcoin get weaker and poorer. Otherwise, everything that you see in the world today will still be there in the world in 20 years. Bitcoin is the greatest opportunity of the 21st century, right? It's worth anywhere from 3 trillion to 106 trillion, depending upon how programmatic and aggressive we want to pursue this opportunity. These opportunities don't come along often. This is the once in a century opportunity. And as Donald Trump has said, never sell your Bitcoin. 0.99 between now and then you've got 10 years for the digital gold rush. You should get your Bitcoin before there's no more Bitcoin for you. And you can see here, in this strategy, we acquire it consistently, and then we use surpluses from the US government to continue to save in Bitcoin. It's worth $106 trillion to the United States. And so what does that look like? Well,
currently, Bitcoin represents only 22 basis points, 0.22% of the global economy, with a market capitalization of around $2 trillion. However, historical data indicates that Bitcoin has been growing at an average rate of 60% per year. Even if this growth rate slows to 20%, Bitcoin's annualized return over the next 2 decades would still average 29%. Under this scenario, Bitcoin's total market capitalization could reach $280 trillion, translating to a Bitcoin price of approximately $13 million per coin. This growth will not upend global financial structures, but rather lead to a natural reallocation of wealth. Those who embrace Bitcoin will become richer and more powerful, while those who ignore it will find themselves increasingly marginalized.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
What's driving the growth of Bitcoin? It is the most powerful force in the world right now. It's growing nearly 60%. It's become the 8th largest asset in the world. It's about to become the largest asset in the world in the next 48 months. What is it? It's all of the smart money in the world running from risk, running from the past toward the future, from something less secure to something more secure. And they're doing it in the most visible way with their capital. This is a map of the wealth distribution in the world, about $900 trillion. If you break it into uses, half of it is just a store of value. We're long-term, we're preserving our capital for the long term. We just want to keep our money. The other half are assets held for utility. I want to do something with the asset. If you drill into the 450 trillion, you realize the problem is that long-term capital is being dissipated and decimated by fires, by floods, by famines, by tariffs, by wars, by competition, by rust, by obsolescence, by torts, by traffic, you name it, right? What's that cost? That costs 10 trillion a year. There's people go, well, what is Bitcoin's use case? The use case is to not suffer $10 trillion a year of damage from entropy, from inflation, from chaos, from the future. Bitcoin's an asset without the financial risk of a currency, a bond, a stock, and it doesn't have the physical risk of real estate and property. And we're stripping away the counterparty risk to everything. And so we're moving away from risk, and what that means is that as the word spreads that there's an opportunity to keep your money without taking risk, long-term capital is being merged into the Bitcoin network. Our assumptions, well, Bitcoin's currently 22 basis points of the global economy. That's $2 trillion. Over 20 years, right now it's been growing about 60% a year. If it decelerates from 60% a year to 20% a year, The average return is going to be 29% a year over the 20 years. That is the base case. That arrives at a price of $13 million a Bitcoin in USD terms, or $280 trillion in the network. Does the world turn upside down? No. What happens? Well, everything pretty much stays the same, except for those that embrace Bitcoin get rich and powerful. Those that don't embrace Bitcoin get weaker and poorer. Otherwise, everything that you see in the world today will still be there in the world in 20 years. Bitcoin is not a threat to the dollar. The dollar is currency. Bitcoin is capital. In the modern world, there are plenty of academic economists. They will just recite ad infinitum. Well, money is a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account. There, I told you. And they just haven't really thought about that past just rote memory. This is why you shouldn't rote memorize stuff in education. Think a little bit harder about what's going on here. If you need money for the next 4 weeks in Argentina, then you're using the peso. If you need money for the next 4 years in Argentina, you're using the dollar. If you need money for the next 40 years in Argentina and you're smart, you're using the Bitcoin. And so the dollar is competing, but is competing against the M2 money supply of the CNY, Chinese currency, European currency, Japanese currency. Right now we're about 17% of that. We should be able to grow to 30% of that. How? With digital currency. If U.S. banks and U.S. corporations can issue digital currencies backed by the U.S. Treasury, we will expand that supply of U.S. currency by $10 trillion, right? That's a digital asset strategy. That's why the stablecoin bill and the Genius Act matter. It is not capital. Bitcoin is less than 1% of the capital of the world. What does it compete with? Not the dollar. Bitcoin competes with property, equity, and bonds. Property, equity, and bonds. And what is it? It's 1%. And what is it going to? I just showed you the shocker $13 million Bitcoin forecast. That gets us to 13% of the capital in 2045. We have two strategies. Expand our currency to dominate the world with the digital currency of choice. Expand our capital to dominate the world with the digital capital of choice.
The U.S. stands at a pivotal crossroads. By fully embracing Bitcoin, it can attract global capital, strengthen the financial system, and reinforce its position as the world's dominant economic superpower. If the U.S. were to back its reserves with Bitcoin, it would solidify its status as the leading custodian of digital wealth. Countries with restrictive financial policies and capital controls, such as China, are actively working to prevent Bitcoin adoption. This is because Bitcoin empowers individuals and businesses with financial sovereignty, allowing them to escape government-imposed restrictions. As global capital increasingly seeks refuge in Bitcoin, the U.S. has a unique opportunity to become the primary hub for digital wealth accumulation.
Embrace Bitcoin and strengthen the dollar. We have the chance to establish, own, and control the global digital capital network. That is Bitcoin. We can back the US dollar with Bitcoin reserves, the only monetary asset that is competitive to the dollar. If I need a liquid, fungible asset to capitalize a company or an institution, it's not real estate, it's not natural gas, it's not art, it's not private and public equity portfolios. It's not even going to be an index of equity. The only asset that I can use other than Bitcoin is U.S. treasuries everywhere in the world. If anybody ever decides to replace those, they'll replace them with Bitcoin. We should own both. Embrace Bitcoin, attract foreign capital. It's not just we're getting the 20th century money. We're getting the rest of the world's money. If I gave you money, if I took all your money, I dropped you in Africa and I said, you got to invest in a diversified portfolio of private and public equity and real estate art in Africa, or you can put your money into the digital capital network and move it anywhere else at the speed of light, and I gave you a choice to punch the orange button or leave it in Africa for 100 years, you would punch the orange button. Everybody else in the world's figuring out the same thing right now. That's why countries will make laws against it. That's why the Chinese have export controls on their capital. All of the capital will flow into the U.S. But if you can't physically come to the U.S., the next best thing is you flow into the digital capital network and you get all the protections of the U.S. And finally, you embrace Bitcoin, you empower Americans. It's American companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet. They're going to outlast, outperform, and outlive their competitors. It's American institutions that are holding Bitcoin. They're going to enrich their shareholders. The beneficiaries are us. And the last point, with the appropriate digital assets framework, we can become the bankers to the world, right? When we export Bitcoin to the world, we're exporting our values: sovereignty, sound money, integrity, property rights. When we export digital currency, we're literally exporting our currency. If we create other digital securities or digital tokens, we'll be exporting our companies, our ideas, our securities, our financial products to the world. We can dominate this industry. So how should the U.S. pursue a Bitcoin strategy? Well, Senator Lummis has given us a clear guideline with the Bitcoin Act in Nashville in July. And what the Bitcoin Act said, it said, let's acquire 1 million Bitcoin over a 5-year period in a programmatic, disciplined fashion, transparent to all. And so let's consider the consequences of this strategy. Well, first of all, last week, the president signed the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Act or order. If we hold that 200,000 Bitcoin for the next 20 years, even though you see a flat line on the screen, the flat line is worth $3 trillion. So that's the value of doing nothing. Sometimes people think that you have to do something to make money. Sometimes the absence of doing awful and stupid things is making money. Doing stuff is highly overrated if the stuff is trading or selling your Bitcoin. The Lummis bill would acquire a million Bitcoin or 1.2 million Bitcoin. If you look at the consequences of that over the time frame, it's worth $16 trillion to the nation. If you get a bit more aggressive and we go for another million Bitcoin, it's worth $34 trillion to the nation. In this case, there's a bit of reflexivity. If the United States starts to more aggressively stockpile Bitcoin, it's going to accelerate the growth of the network. It's going to accelerate capital flowing in the network. It's going to increase and expand the overall digital capital network. If we move to a triple max strategy, you'll end up with 4 million Bitcoin. That's worth $73 trillion to America. And of course, President Trump has laid out a guideline. We should be the superpower. If you want a superpower strategy, here's a superpower strategy. Acquire Bitcoin consistently. By the way, over what time frame? Consistently daily between now and the 0.99. 0.99 is January of the year 2035, the point at which 99% of the Bitcoin supply has been mined. The asset becomes effectively capped for all practical purposes because the last 1% comes out over 100 years. 0.99 between now and then, you've got 10 years for the digital gold rush. You should get your Bitcoin before there's no more Bitcoin for you. And you can see here, in this strategy, we acquire it consistently, and then we use surpluses from the U.S. government to continue to save in Bitcoin. It's worth $106 trillion to the United States. And so what does that look like? Well, the Lummis plan, which is grand, is modest in some ways, and a modest strategic Bitcoin reserve plan neutralizes the national debt. Sometimes doing modest things are actually brilliant as long as you do the thing. It's like the people that bought just a little bit of Bitcoin in 2012. It was a modest investment. It made them billionaires. A modest thing 20 years in advance is a brilliant thing. If you're more aggressive, the triple max plan negates the national debt. The superpower plan creates a global superpower. We bought 78% of the United States for $40 million. $40 million purchased nearly 80% of this country. Think about it for a second. Bitcoin is the greatest opportunity of the 21st century, right? It's worth anywhere from 3 trillion to 106 trillion, depending upon how programmatic and aggressive we want to pursue this opportunity. These opportunities don't come along often. This is the once-in-a-century opportunity. And as Donald Trump has said, never sell your Bitcoin. And I'll leave you with the final thought. What happens if we allow another nation to claim title to Bitcoin superpower? If we don't claim it, we give them control of the network. We give them all the wealth in the world. We risk being impoverished and imperiled by a hostile nation that controls all the world's digital energy. You could have clung to your glass beads when the world went to the gold standard. You could have clung to your steam engines when the world went to internal combustion. You know, you could have kept your wood-burning stoves when Rockefeller offered you petroleum. We could have dismissed nuclear power. We once had another project. We had a Manhattan project. It was a large investment in nuclear energy. Do you want to control the world's digital energy? Because the digital economy will run on digital energy. The choice is ours, either prosperity or poverty in the 21st century. Bitcoin is manifest destiny for America.
The strategic roadmap for U.S. Bitcoin adoption has already been outlined in legislative initiatives such as the Bitcoin Act proposed by Senator Cynthia Lummis. Under this plan, the U.S. would accumulate 1 million Bitcoin over a 5-year period in a transparent and disciplined manner. Saylor emphasizes that Bitcoin represents the greatest investment opportunity of the 21st century. Just as past technological revolutions transformed global power structures, such as the shift from steam engines to internal combustion or from glass beads to the gold standard, Bitcoin is the next inevitable evolution in capital markets. Those who fail to recognize its potential risk being left behind. Please like and subscribe.